Uh, okay, I'm continuing. Okay. Good morning and welcome. Kathy Wells, President of the Coalition of Little Rock Neighborhoods. This is our Zoom meeting of Saturday, June 12, 2021. Our guest speaker is Paul Kelly, a former city director, tireless advocate for children, and a veteran of the 1990s efforts to reduce violence and drive-by shootings and reduce the influence of gangs in our city, which we succeeded in doing. And several of us in the leadership have approached the mayor and the board of directors about bringing back those successful programs. So we wanted to talk a little bit with Paul about what those might look like with a couple of revisions to the modern day. We also were made aware overnight and this morning, the mayor has revised his sales tax proposal. That list is on the agenda for approval by the city board Tuesday, and they would call a September 14th tax election. There would be a sunset after 10 years, which was a big topic of discussion. The items we're following remained at the same dollars on affordable housing and the street dollars divided into a needs list and a equal shares all 7 wards list. And the questionable indoor sports arena remained at its $37 million construction, and the annual of $8 million. They still are contending that it's worth it to finance it with general revenue money because all the folks coming to spend money at the tournaments will boost the overall economy, which of course a lot of folks find debatable. But let's try and look at the connections between these spending proposals, for example, in public safety, and what Paul Kelly will be talking to us about today. The public safety numbers for community policing were proposed for $10 million operation dollars a year. They remained at $10 million operating dollars a year. There was another $10 million for technology public safety. And then there was the vehicles for $37 million. And one of the things that Paul made a point of that I very much appreciated, because it was echoed by folks that I spoke with in the community programs at City Hall and police department at City Hall. And that was the fact that where you would go to the kids in the 90s, Paul, today they are looking at them on social media. So we need to have staff that is following all of these problem youth, let's just sum them up to say, on, let's see, Snapchat and TikTok and Instagram and the other types of media, which means we do need to spend some money on that field. And my impression is, once again, it's not enough and not long enough.
From Kathy Webb.
So, let me, with that introduction, ask Paul Kelly to talk to us about what worked then that we need to be doing again today. Paul?
Well, thank you for including me on this. And I have, of course, think that intervention and prevention are critical to public safety. I think that back then we were able to actually, well, the PIT started before I was elected, but it apparently was unable to be implemented because either the city did not know exactly how to implement programs like this, keeping kids from doing something bad was not in the skill set of the people who were running the city of Little Rock, And so they had a hard time trying to figure out how to spend it. And in fact, the money that was, I think it was 3.25 was what the designated amount was. And for multiple years, a lot of that money had not been spent. And it was actually then diverted and used for other things. In fact, the first meeting I attended about the budget, there was talk after I got elected. The city manager, Cy Carney, was trying to get a second helicopter for the police purchased at the cost and operated and put into operation, which would come to $550,000. And when asked where the money was coming from, he said from leftover PIT programs that didn't spend their money. And the reason they weren't doing that is because it was difficult to find places and organizations and nonprofits who actually were located in the areas of the city where the children lived. And they had to, so it was, some of them weren't prepared to do that because of their administration capacity. There were churches that wanted to do things. And again, there was a lot of help with Don Crary's, oh goodness, I can't think what it was now, but anyway, they were helping do that. Of course, Cy Carney didn't get his second helicopter, and before I got tossed out, I was able to actually recoup the money that had been taken away earlier through the help of my other board of director friends. And so we were able to then fully disperse all of those funds. And by 2000, I was there from 96 to 2000, and the majority of that money was going to after school and summer programs. Some of it was actually given to the city for the recreational use of for the kids that were in the programs. There was another sort of more on the street intervention where respected members of the neighborhoods were hired and paid to go out into the neighborhood in almost a 24-hour, 7 days a week effort to become familiar with folks and to intervene where they could in preventing an escalation of arguments or problems between not just gang members, but also just to be aware of what was going on in the neighborhood that might escalate and intervene to talk about the people that were involved in that. I can tell you that before I left, I had done a study to determine, because the police, well, what happened was that the police records showed that after, in the last 4 years, that the arrests and convictions of youth had gone down 75%. And of course, the police were claiming some of the credit for that. And I assume that that was a variable. But what I did, and that was a time when Bill Clinton was giving out a lot of money to police stations, to police. And so I took 5 other communities, Jonesboro, Fort Smith, Fayetteville, Bentonville, and I don't know if I remember what the other one was, but, and Little Rock, and all of them had gotten new money increase in police funds, but none of them, in fact, had any decrease in juvenile crime. And in fact, some of them had increases. And their combined population was very similar to Little Rock. So I suggested to the board that, in fact, it was these programs that were what really impacted the reduction in violence. And it's you hear the term all the time, it's far easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And as early in the development of children who are at risk, which are from poverty, from trauma, from other kinds of stresses to family, need to be intervened with earlier. And we, I think, didn't go there, but we actually, I would say that the biggest impact came from just all these kids in their community having an opportunity to do something that was rewarding and fun and enabled them to learn and to keep out of trouble because they had something else to do. And I can tell you that I am positive that we cannot be blaming the kids for oftentimes or not understanding why they don't succeed if we don't offer them any other opportunities. And that is what is most critical to do. I'm not privy to all the information. I'm, more of the audience watching what's going on instead of being dealt into it. But I can assure you that this kind of investment is critical. I do want to say that my most frustrating thing after I left there, I was called upon to go to all these meetings to become part of the children and family work in the city of Little Rock. And we have had a very difficult time, and it's still happening, I think, that these programs are not taking in and getting the kind of information they need to illustrate their benefit. And in part, that is because to actually spend money for people to go back and call the schools to do the work that comes with program development, there's nobody there funded to do it. And I think that's something that we need to take a look at. Back in the day, they were giving them $50,000 a year to run a $100,000 program, and they didn't have enough money to do all that would be able to really make it not only a high quality after school and summer program, but also to have the ability to do some analysis and show the direct outcomes of their programs. But again, if everybody who's raised children know you got to keep them busy, and you got to keep them busy doing good things, and so that they don't get into things that would send them in the wrong direction. And that giving them opportunities from families requires money for baseball uniforms, for gloves, for Boy Scout. All that stuff costs money. And those kinds of resources were not made available to all those kids until some of these programs got there. And that's why I think they were able to reduce the number of arrests and the crime that was going on.
Paul, I sent you the current bid that we're focused on right now, bid 1278, which had the expectation of starting July the 1 and sending folks out to work with youth, as many as 100 youth, ages 13 to 30. An appendix to that listed the current programs. We just had a question in about, is there some nonprofit operating today? And the answer to that is yes. And that is in everyone's email where I sent you the actual text of bid 1278 so you could see for yourself what is in process right now. And they very helpfully attached to that text, bottom line, Appendix A, I think it's called, spreadsheet about what's going on today. And it is exactly as you referred to, after school and summer programs, Paul. So they continue that, but I expect when we delve into it, we will see exactly what you've also observed, which is too few dollars and too little evaluation. Of course, if they'd done evaluation as your professional standards would call for, we wouldn't have this debate because we could go to the file drawer or the computer and pull up the evaluation and it would all be laid out for us.
Right.
So we have that. I hope that answers the question about what's in the neighborhoods today.
Okay.
Dale, you had a question. What was it?
Oh, actually, I did not have a question at this point in time, though.
I'm sorry. Bear with your amateur observer there. I thought I saw something. Moving right along. Do we have any other questions for Paul?
Yeah, let me ask, do you see in the sales tax proposal monies sufficient or otherwise to deal with or to provide in these kind of programs and deal with the issues underlying them?
Well, I haven't looked at it. So but I've read about it. Child care is a critical issue. And I think that I understand there are funds in there for child care expenses. Is that coming from the tax or am I reading from
There
the
is
things
a
that the
provision
government is?
in the early childhood education line item of the proposed sales tax. And that money remained the same from previous, over this last revision, at $40 million operating over the 10 years, which would be $4 million a year. And when you look at the text of the resolution that is on the agenda that I sent out to everyone an hour ago, there is a description about how that money is allocated. Paul, I need to send that to you. I'm sorry.
Well, I understand.
But there is something in there explicitly about spending for childcare.
Okay. Well, I'm also aware that there's money coming from the federal government for those kinds of things too. And I certainly hope the city, and that's another venue for shaping a intervention for the disadvantaged children of the community.
Denise
Oh.
has some questions.
Yes. Denise. Denise, unmute.
Yeah, I did.
There we
Yeah.
go.
Okay, so Paul, you talked about the city reappropriating money for, from the PIT program to the helicopters. Are there, does the city now have tools in place to help it avoid?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, Lance Hines asked me and affirmed that there was a ordinance that I put in place. I think it was co-sponsored by Dean Compuris, that this money will never be spent on anything other than that, and anything, and then it also included, and the money from the past that was taken will be reimbursed. So yes, there is a prevention from that ever happening again.
But that was specific, wasn't that specific to the PIT money? So
Yes.
okay, so in other words, if any new program is developed, there would have to be a new ordinance passed in order for the.
Well, this, I think that would be sort of, well, I don't know if they put that in the PIT fund. Is that how they're framing it or not?
Right. I'm an auditor, so
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, good. Well, good. That's a good call. Yeah.
Point of information though, Denise, what they can do is they can cut the budget. It had risen to 5.5 million. And a few years back, we had a big round of budget cuts. Sales tax fell short, which is our big funding source. And that went down to 4.75 million. I do understand that a hidden regrettable action has been the fact that money unspent has been returned to the Treasury from the PIT allocation every year because their staff has not put together and spent the contracts to spend all their dollars. So that's something we ought to be pursuing. And you might in fact help us by looking at the that very flow of dollars.
well, the state, Kathy, the state does something very similar with state agencies, unless the money has to be like in a special revenue type account in order for it to be carried over from year to year. So in other words, there have to be provisions or steps taken in order to prevent that clawback from taking place.
Well, if what Kathy said is true, that's the same darn thing that was going on back when I was there, that I thought that we had stopped, because again, they were starting up new programs. And so they, you're penalizing them from saving money for the city, but anyway, that if that's going on, that needs to be confronted.
And one of the other points that you were making, which I think we all observe just in general practice of government policies, is you've got to spend the money, you've got to consistently keep at it when you've got a challenge such as we're dealing with here, because this is going year to year to year. The kids keep coming up, growing up, the families keep having problems, and we need to persist. So that's the challenge of saying, oh, we reduced the crime rate 75%. Everybody rested on that laurel and let it all slip away.
Right.
And that is our challenge, I think, as advocates. Restoring the 4.75 to the 5.5 is certainly a good point that we can be very vocal about. Um,
And I'm going to say one more thing. I think a lot of work needs to be done in community programming. Kids vote with their feet, and if programs are operating and the kids aren't coming, they're going to have to look at that and deal with that. And again, I think they've been laxed, and maybe it's not them, but not getting support. The kind of support they need from the board is going on, because I've said we've done all these things, meetings about, I mean, even after I was gone, we were still meeting about how to fix this, and had a plan, and it never got implemented.
yes, we have a master plan for youth, children, and families on the city website. But
Right,
just like the master plan for parks and the master plan for the zoo, which we've been looking at over the sales tax debates, they are very wide ranging. They, in the classic advocates practice, list everything
Yeah.
and have no dollars attached to any of it. So it's just whatever somebody might be persuaded to offer, be persuaded to pursue, be persuaded to want in the budget. It's justified because it's in the master plan.
Right.
And that's not the same thing as managing your plan
Okay.
and being persistent and saying year to year to year, we need to keep on with this, that, and the other thing.
Right.
So that is something that we do need to be working on. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah,
Denise.
Kathy and Paul, USAID is one of, I don't know how many federal agencies that used to offer money for planning grants, planning and development, and then evaluation grants. Has the city looked into funding from private foundations or federal agencies for this type of funding to do this type of planning and evaluation?
Excellent question. I'll relay the question. I know that there's been a lot of talk over the decades when this comes up for approval at the annual budget from city directors, particularly those that aren't particularly supportive, about, well, how do you know it works? So there's always been some line item in lip service given to evaluation. But I gather from Paul's observation that it is not nearly what it should be.
Right. Another option potentially could be to recruit some PhDs who need research projects to publish papers, to do some primary research, to get them involved and turn them loose on it.
Right.
Oh, that is excellent. Do we have a PhD program out at Euler? Paul, do you know? This is
There's
your
a doctor of education.
Education, PhD,
Yeah.
but they've got a class today, I guess is my question. They got some folks coming through that pipeline.
we would have to check on it, but suspect so.
Okay, Ron, well, that's your assignment then, okay?
All right.
Because that is a really good idea. We know they have criminal justice, and they're always discussing things on the 6 o'clock news, which is another potential.
Well, and they have a Masters of Public Administration program out there as well, so.
They do, and don't overlook the Clinton School. Mary Hinthorn, graduate of the Clinton School. Is this something that you might help us pursue with the right folks?
I'll give it a try. This is a hard time of year with the Clinton School because it's summer, people are out. But yeah,
Well, you know, this is what we call a good anytime project. So we could put a little question on the table and then pursue it when everybody's back in their offices. And the Clinton School, of course, has a fabulous reputation for doing great many things that are good. So that is a real possibility. Paul, I want to say thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it was an honor. And thank you all for all you do continually for the city. I mean, it's so important. And, you know, that's where my family is. And so I care very much about the community. And I do really appreciate the work that all of you have done and the efforts I see. And people have been around a long time, and there's a lot of good knowledge in your group. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. I think
Thank
now
you,
we
Paul.
need to pick up the sales tax and any other issues that might come before us. I know we had several people leaving right at 11, so I'm trying to be respectful of giving you a chance to hear and be heard on your topic of interest before everyone has to leave on us. Does anybody have a particular observation about the revised sales tax? I know it's just arrived, but they're coming up for a vote Tuesday, and I'm wondering if we want to try and send a letter with concerns and questions from the coalition.
Well, I guess the first thing I'd bring up is that if you look through this thing, about half of it is being devoted to like operation and maintenance, about half of these expenditures, which means basically at the end of the 10-year period, city's going to have to either extend this tax or come up with other funding sources for it. So, I mean, that really gives me a concern. And I look at something like they want to increase spending for IT by over $24 million. You know, you want to increase spending on public safety by, you know, over $65 million. And that's over the 10-year period.
Yes.
So, you know, when I look at these things, I just see a tremendous amount of money in operation and maintenance. You know, and basically, you know, the chickens are going to come home to roost in 10 years. And, you know, why in the world does economic development need an extra $11 million just for operations? I just look at those things and I look at the sports complex, $37 million for a sports complex. That's going to cost the city $8 million a year to run. And if the city's own analysis shows that their receipts will not even cover the operation and maintenance on that facility. And then you put in a soccer complex. Well, the area already has a great big soccer complex in North Little Rock. You know, why are we trying to compete with that? You know, if you're going to do something unique that really adds to the area instead of competing with existing resources. So those are just some observations I wanted to toss out there.
Well, and let me say, I've been, you know, I was head of a state agency for a lot of years. And as we all know, the overhead or the employment cost of government is well, in any instance, over half of all the money spent. So, I mean, I'm not surprised that this includes that much money. That's what it costs to operate programs. And, you know, I mean, generally about 2/3 of public expenditure is for employment. So, and then of course, if you have employees, infrastructure or not only buildings and what have you, you see what the state's gone through in recent times, but also for technology. I mean, at my agency, I replaced faithfully every 3 years, every computer in that office because at that time there was too much change. There was so much change going on every year that you had to do that to keep up. And so, and that sort of thing. And now you may stretch it out a little more these days, but I'm sorry, I think infrastructure and all of that goes to having a decently paid and competent public workforce.
Yeah, I think the point I was making, Norman, is that they're asking for increases, you know, so that's, this is an increase over their existing level. And, you know, that's what I'm concerned about.
Well, but the increase also for new programs and new structures that they'll have to staff, so.
That's true, but I'm guessing we've reached the point of pattern that leaders believe the community is now very receptive to a 10-year tax that gets renewed. And perhaps some priorities are changed, but it remains, for the most part, the same priorities as always. There will be a large chunk for parks. There will be a large chunk for police. There will be some special projects called at the indoor sports arena. And of course, if it turns out to be a white elephant, we're stuck with it unless we can find some private person to take it on, which sure doesn't seem to be likely. But that's my guess. Norman, do you think that's the pattern you're seeing? They've fallen into a 10-year rhythm and they would expect renewal, at least at some level?
Oh, yeah, and I think one of the major changes here is the 10-year thing, and as opposed to the the continuing period of time. 20 years gave $1 billion, over $1 billion to this. This is only $530 million. And so, but again, I think that, again, the people 10 years from now will get to vote on it again. So unless there's some structural change, I think you're right that this is going to happen again. So.
One of the things that we raised about remains exactly the same. This is all in a resolution of intent. It is not legally binding. I regret that Jim Lynch wasn't here. I'd asked him to go back and look at the ballots, the actual ballot language from 10 years ago, and then from an earlier period, which was 12 votes for Little Rock. And in the ballot itself, you had 12 line items, which you could vote yes or no on. You would vote yes or no on. And nobody is responding favorably to that approach. They all say, well, this is okay. And I think that we might want to go on and bring back that language, at least, and put it in a letter. Would you all agree that that's a letter we could send?
I would.
Well,
Down the spending.
I can't speak because I don't have I have an organization that so I can't do it without a vote. So I would have to decline to participate. So.
Okay. But it's the sort of a thing that we've raised before that we could, I think, properly bring back again. And it's in line with ongoing advocacy for good government and clarity and spending and all that sort of a good thing.
If it's a generalized letter, that's a different story than saying, this is what we wish, or want to happen. So.
Well, that would be it. We would attach the comparison of the previous ballots and say, these were good ballots. This one doesn't reach that standard or something like that. But it wouldn't be any explicit, the coalition really has voted for you to change from A to Z. No, it wouldn't be that specific at all. One of the things that is of concern, the fields that we've been looking at is affordable housing. And I have dug out still missing information. The reference is to combining in one phrase both rehabilitation and construction. As you know, these are very different programs, but there's no breakdown about how much of the affordable housing money would go to what category. Yeah, $20 million affordable housing. Well, how much of it would be putting in a homeless program, which I gather is building some more of those duplexes like Jericho Way has got? How much of the 20 million would be going to program we've had for years where a low-income homeowner could get up to $25,000 to bring their house up to code because they're occupying it? How much would be acquiring houses on the unsafe vacant list and then flipping them into new hands? Probably not fully rehabilitating from what I'm hearing. And of course, if you start talking about wholesale renovation, $20 million is gone in an instant. And I gather that they're not trying to do that. But I haven't managed to get anyone to specify for me anything better than, well, we would try and get new owners for houses on the unsafe vacant list. One of the things that I researched did turn up, and I've shared that with you if you want to go back and look at it. There was an excellent study in 2016 by a group of Washington, D.C. talent called ReLocal. And the executive summary pointed out that they had found in an area that is most of our neighborhoods. Sorry, Norman, it didn't quite get to the heights, but it took care of the historic area and out a little bit and south end down to Fush Creek. And they got door-to-door volunteers. They surveyed 8,000 parcels. And they found that of the houses that were there, 13% were vacant, which turned out to be, let me pull my magic number up here, 1,040 houses. Now, our unsafe vacant list runs about 500 odd. Mary, do you remember the number that we just pulled up for the current unsafe vacant list? They don't have all of those tallied because, of course, you've got to have an inspection to get on the official city list. But it
Yeah, I'm
gives it a
sorry,
wider
I
focus.
don't remember the numbers. I have the documents if you need them right now. Do you need the numbers now?
I think we'll work up a little email afterward and send it out with this material, okay? Because it's not been put into a brief form. And it's the sort of a question I think that we do want to raise with the board and the mayor. We'd sure like some clarity on spending, because you're talking about 500 odd in an unsafe vacant list. And we've got a really excellent tally in part of the city, a significant part of the city, that showed there were 1,000 plus houses that are vacant that needed to be upgraded and reoccupied. And then in the 8,000 plots parcel survey, there were 22% vacant lots, which is to say 1,760 lots to be redeveloped. These are in service to the coalition longstanding advocacy to manage our plan for growth. And it comes back to what Paul Kelly was talking about in his field of expertise. You've got to kind of know the numbers that you need to help, the numbers that you need to deal with, and then create the plan and work the plan to, in fact, resolve whatever the problem is that government's there to help fix. So I was proud of that research, and I wanted to go on and get that in form and send that to the city. And I think that you all would be pleased with that. But do you agree that's pretty good research that we ought to be bringing to everybody's attention? Be asking them, what are you going to do about the 1,000 lots and the 1,000 houses?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. I thought we might find that appealing information. Especially since their own breakdown just isn't there. The other category, let's see, I was trying to think what else. There's another big research project. Mary, help me out here. What have we been producing in our research in the last couple of weeks? I'm sorry, I had something in my head and it went out of my head. So I'm not going to worry about it. If I figure it out, I'll share it with you.
Are you talking about the large number of houses or addresses that are in the 2016 study?
That is a good point. Mary is pursuing a classic comparison of the list of the houses from the ReLocal study and the address list for unsafe vacant, and in fact, the couple of dozen that are in the land bank, so that we could refine our questioning to City Hall that showed we had done our research. And when we tossed around 1,000 houses, that number would probably be revised to say something on the order of there was 1,000 houses identified in 2016. 500 of them are on the current unsafe vacant list, but you need to deal with the additional 500 you haven't taken into consideration. So, we're doing some good research. Thank you, Mary.
And also the cost of rehab has gone up exponentially just of late. So we need to increase that amount to cover the increase in cost of construction.
I think they have been shying away from wholesale that. I think they might be doing some really good secure, but I need to keep on pressing them because I'm not getting clear answers. Or I will get an answer from one speaker that is essentially contradicted by a second speaker. And once again, because this is all combined in one line item, what we need is a listing down the page of allocating so much for rehab, so much for owner occupied, so much for the unsafe vacant houses that maybe just need to be secured until they can persuade a new investor to come in. Maybe with that tax credit that we help support, remember in the last session, the historic tax credit fund has been expanded. And a lot of these properties are in historic districts. So that all begins to link together. And in fact, one other thing that I'm pursuing that I've realized with this revised list from the sales tax and all the discussion with Paul Kelly in spending then and spending now, and that current contract going out for bid through PIT today that you all got a copy of when you look back through your emails. I know I've been sitting a flurry, but government's really churning up this week. And that is, they need, both police and PIT officials talk to me about how we need to follow these youth on social media. As far as I can tell, that's going to be a technology category. And the question in this information technology line item in the sales tax should raise how much of that would go for this particular ongoing effort. Or do we go leave it all in the PIT program and make sure that we don't fall short of the dollars in PIT? It's a classic government allocation question. But we can focus on them looking at it all together with questions like that. And once again, they want to buy police vehicles, maybe with the emergency federal relief money, which we need to find out about. But certainly they have a line item in the sales tax for police vehicles. And I think that it would be a question about how about maybe a little bit more for intervention supporting PIT, because there's a lot of emphasis these days on sending out specialists who can help with those who are clearly mentally ill or otherwise distressed that aren't a criminal threat to the neighborhood, where a lot of tragic deaths and injuries have occurred in recent months.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. And a lot of people will differentiate that. They talk about a crisis intervention team, a CIT. Austin and other cities are getting into that, where you're using, not armed police to come into situations, but, trained people in social work or psychology, can probably better address nonviolent situations and try to de-escalate them. If you look at so many of the police calls are for routine things like welfare checks. We don't need to be sending armed police officers out there in those situations.
Yeah, just to let you know, I've done crisis intervention training for police officers before because I work in the mental health field. A couple of things that concern me: they are shutting down the crisis stabilization unit that is housed next to the juvenile detention center. The state has pulled funding from that, so the 3 crisis stabilization units throughout the state will be pulled. They're looking at soon, within the next, probably the next 60 days or so. And then, yes, statistically about 1 out of every 10 calls is what they call mental, which I don't necessarily agree with the term, but it is for people who are having some type of mental crisis. And if we don't do more to invest, we're not talking about defunding, we're talking about refunding, maybe and allocating some of our police services to. Dale is a great point. A lot of calls are welfare checks. We don't need to send armed officers, or we need to have at least several crisis intervention CIT trained officers on every shift that can be a part of some of those calls. The same as you would have a female sometimes show up if a female is involved in something, so that they can have a little bit of special attention. So anyway, yeah,
Do we have that now? Do we have CIT trained sufficiently to put them on every shift?
I don't know what the percentage is of Little Rock police that are CIT trained. I can look into that and bring it back to the group if you'd like me to. But I don't think it's ever enough. I know that just in standard police training, it's usually it's just a small fraction of the time they spend in training to learn about these type of interventions. And anyway, so I'll find that out.
Yeah,
I'll
please
ask.
do. That is an excellent point. And, we're right here on the cusp, and we haven't gotten into that, and we don't have information on it. We're coming to the end of our hour. But I'm going to be really going after this for federal emergency funding, because I'm guessing that would be a very good use of those dollars if it's permissible. Luke, you and I'll do some emailing back and forth. And
yes, absolutely.
we will, thank you. That is a really hot topic that we might raise in our letter about the sales taxes. Where in this sales tax spending is there provision for this? So I'll try.
Yeah, I think we're moving in a different, even talking about what things were like 30 years ago in 1990 are much different now. I think there's a lot of distrust in our communities of color towards law enforcement and towards any type of intervention services. And this is, like we've talked about, it is intergenerational. This is not something we throw a couple of $1 million at, like our homeless issue. I mean, there was a 10-year plan 20 years ago that was never really fully implemented, and now we're seeing what's happening with our homeless population. So anyway, I'll stop preaching to the choir.
Well, you're right. Thank you about that. Just one other quick note. I participated in some community policing workshops aimed at improving and expanding community policing in LRPD in May. I just checked yesterday on the progress of that, and it's not moving fast enough for us, and we're taken by events now. But know that they are pursuing that. I feel very good about what the outside speakers said in the workshops I attended. I feel good about what I was able to put into the proposal, which was a whole lot of, why don't you report it and let the public see XYZ, as you might suppose. So look for more on that. Community policing is getting a boost, bottom line. But it's not going to come that fast, but it's coming. So any other final thoughts, concerns, John? I know you were concerned about Chick-fil-A.
Bye. I've got to go. Thank you.
Got to go. Thank you so much, Norman.
Bye, Norman.
Hi, Norman.
Bye.
Yeah, if you have any suggestions about dealing with that, I guess the only positive thing you could say, it kind of balances the sea of concrete that's occurring in the I-30 corridor to bring more on Broad Street and totally obliterate downtown. But it's not, certainly not what we need or should have in a downtown environment.
Well, if you look at the actual listing of documents that I did send out to you folks, they went to the Board of Adjustment with the corporate Chick-fil-A plan, and they went through and asked for waivers, and they got waivers for every downtown special plan and policy. They didn't want landscaping. They didn't want to be on the street. They didn't want to have front door on the street. They didn't want to have a big window because they're not planning to have indoor dining. They did want an enormous Chick-fil-A sign on the side of the building. And the Board of Adjustment just said yes to all of that. The only two remaining actions where citizens have a chance to act and raise questions and object and persuade city officials to hold firm against something is they're planning, they must close the alley or franchise the alley by ordinance before the city board of directors. Right now, they're treating this as an annual rental of $75, when in fact, they would close one end of the alley. They would effectively take it over for their private property profitable use.
Yeah, I know, that's
the question
ridiculous.
is, you should sell it for market rate.
Right.
Whatever the $1 zillion is they're putting into this project. A healthy chunk of that would be the alley strip of 20 foot wide.
Yep. That
Um,
makes it all work. It's a
they can't do
tremendous
that.
value. Yeah,
So, you know, why is the
work
city
for them.
going to be leaving that cash on the table? It would be the question. Y'all need to be watching those agendas closely. Right now, it's not on the agenda. Don't know when it would come up on the agenda. And they're going to treat it as, well, we've already agreed to this. This is just a rubber stamp vote of the board. So it's going to be up to citizens to raise objections timely. And that starts next week, essentially. Start beginning to get your concerns on record. The more meaningful concern is there has to be a traffic study that Public Works has to approve before they can get a building permit. And this is related to the fact this is Highway 70. So the State Highway District Permit Officer must also grant them a permit for that driveway cut on and off Broadway. One of the things that I wanted to raise from what I looked at on the sketches was the fact that they're now showing one good thing, which is you only come off of Broadway to the right, and then you exit onto Broadway to the right. But that raises the question about how many people stack up along Broadway's traffic lane, waiting on a lunch peak hour to get into the lot where they're going to be running serpentines around in 2 lanes to get to the order window and the pickup window and then exit. And the question that I have is, what about shifting that to Spring Street? So if they're going to be queuing, it'll be on lesser streets. And then you might exit onto Broadway, but you don't have any ability to get onto that lot from Broadway. You have to go down and around the corner. So I will leave you with looking at that and seeing how that might be painted on the pavement. You can't just say flip the whole plan, because that messes up corporate access to passenger driver side windows to order windows, and I respect that. But I am wondering what that has to do with where they paint the pavement for the line waiting to order. So that's as far as I've gotten with that. And whether Jamie Collins and the state hold firm against pressure from Chick-fil-A is a very good question. But we've had an explosion this week in the downtown over obliterating a whole city block of Broadway, Spring, 7th and 8th in service to the Chick-fil-A. They would take the north half of the block, but the south half is parking now, so that doesn't change. And if you were ever planning to drive Broadway in the lunch hour, you should think again. It will only get worse.
Yep. Kathy, I had one other thing.
Yes, sir.
I attended Downtown Partnerships meeting with Police Chief on Tuesday, and started out with, I'd say, his being very defensive when first commenter brought up kind of looking like a return to the 1990s. And no, it wasn't. Had a number of folks from some of the high rises about loud vehicles and so on, and not getting a response, not being able to get through to 911. Anyway, the bottom line, the police representatives present that they go by statistics and allocate resources according to statistics, reports received, and so on. And they brought up that you can report by email. And that email address is tru@littlerock.gov. So it might be a good idea, if you're not aware of that, to take that down and
Send out a little email to everybody. Now you're saying TRU, like time return underwater.
correct, yeah. And that might be where it ends up, but it's worth
And
it.
what is it we're reporting to this?
Pardon?
What concerns does the public report at TRU@littlerock.gov?
Oh, anything they have. There's talk about street racing, loud vehicles, disturbances of quiet enjoyment of their property, and different things.
The nuisance category stuff.
Yes, right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thing that might not want to bother 911, and you can't get 311 during the weekend, so.
There's also
that way they
311, you know. I hope you
Pardon?
know that. There's also a 311 email. I hope you know that.
yeah, I have, yeah, yes.
Probably repeat all that. I'll
But
try and get a little.
this says it goes to them, and it will go into their reports, and they allocate resources according to the statistics, so.
Did anybody downtown talk about gunfire?
No, I think
Okay.
the shootings came up, but not directly as you mentioned with the gunfire.
Did anything from any police speaker seem to reassure folks in the room they were responding with successful intervention programs in light of what was done successfully before?
I guess there was some mention of that, and that they do respond, that the officers in the Riverfront district there, which a lot of that was down the Riverfront folks, that they were building relationships with the business owners and the people in the area and responding. Also, Paris Towers was mentioned, and the problems there, and ongoing problems there, and people there being afraid to respond or report because they end up getting beat up or whatever. But no conclusions.
They've got a brand new executive director who came to that DNA meeting and knew nothing.
Yes.
But promised to look into everything. So DNA's got to keep inviting the Paris manager back and her back, and that's your classic advocacy pursuit there. Anything from anybody else before we conclude the meeting here?
Well, I guess the only other thing I'd add is that, we got a big item there in that tax proposal dealing with the Little Rock Port Authority. And, they pointed out we've already spent, $500 million there. And if you look at how that's funded, it looks like, Little Rock is putting out a lot of money in support of the port, but yet we're providing a lot of employment for people in Benton and Bryant and other people outside the city limits. And I think, it'd really be better if the Little Rock Port Authority could become self-sustained.
That question gets raised every time these issues come up, Dale. And city leadership, in the firm persuasion of 50 for the Future and the Chamber, is adamant that they think it's all great for the greater development area. So we have no chance to persuade them otherwise. We can bring it up again. I'm going to say thank you so much, and the meeting is concluded.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.